3 umpires. 1 player. And a moment that stopped an entire stadium dead in its silence. Immediately after the final out, before the crowd could even process what had just happened, 3 umpires moved with unusual speed, not toward the dugout, not toward the mound, but directly toward Shohei Ohtani. They surrounded him. Demanded his bat. And then, in a scene that felt more like a crime investigation than a baseball game, they stripped the jersey right off his back. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't boo. They just stared. 2 Diamondbacks players stepped in next. They physically restrained Ohtani and subjected him to what can only be described as a full-body search, right there, in the middle of the field, under the lights, in front of millions watching at home. And Ohtani? The man who is famously calm. The man who smiles through 100 miles per hour fastballs and World Series pressure. That man dropped to his knees, punched the ground with his fist, and screamed at the umpires with a fury nobody had ever seen from him before. So what on earth just happened? This wasn't a brawl. This wasn't a protest. This was something far more serious. And once you understand the full story, the rules, the suspicion, the history behind this moment, you'll realize this wasn't just a controversial night in baseball. This was the night the sport itself was forced to confront something it had been quietly ignoring for years. To understand why this moment was so explosive, you need to understand the context leading into that game. Ohtani had been absolutely untouchable for weeks. His bat speed numbers were historic. His exit velocities were breaking records that hadn't been touched in over a decade. Every scout in the league had their eyes on him, not just because he was performing, but because of how he was performing. In baseball, when a player suddenly produces numbers that defy physics, 2 things happen simultaneously. First, fans celebrate. Second, the opposition starts asking questions. That's the quiet, uncomfortable truth of professional sports. Extraordinary performance always invites scrutiny. Not because greatness is impossible, but because the history of the game has shown, over and over again, that some players have tried to gain an unfair edge. Pine tar. Grip substances. Modified bats. The list goes on. So by the time Ohtani walked to the plate that night against the Diamondbacks, there was already tension in the air. Players in the opposing dugout had been watching. Coaches had been watching. And most importantly, the umpires had received a formal complaint before the first pitch was even thrown. That complaint? That Ohtani's bat was illegal. Now, here's where it gets complicated, and where the story becomes about far more than just one night, one game, or one player. Most fans don't know the full extent of what Major League Baseball allows and prohibits when it comes to equipment. And that gap in knowledge is exactly why moments like this feel so shocking when they happen. A legal bat in MLB must meet extremely specific standards. The length, the diameter, the weight, the material, all of it is governed by rules that were written and rewritten after decades of controversy. The rules exist because bat tampering has a long and embarrassing history in the sport. Corked bats. Flattened grains. Illegal lacquer coatings. These aren't myths, they're documented cases that have resulted in suspensions, erased statistics, and in some instances, careers that never fully recovered from the cloud of suspicion. The challenge for umpires is this: from a distance, a tampered bat and a legal bat look identical. You cannot tell the difference with your eyes during a game. You can only know by confiscating it, by physically taking it, measuring it, testing it. And that's exactly what happened. When the complaint was formally filed, the umpires had no choice. The rulebook is clear. If a credible objection is raised about a player's equipment, officials are required to act. They cannot look the other way. They cannot wait until after the season. They must respond, in the moment, with the full weight of their authority. So when those 3 umpires surrounded Ohtani after the game, it wasn't personal. It was procedural. The problem was, it didn't look procedural. It looked like an ambush. Let's go back to the field. The game had just ended. Ohtani had performed, as he almost always does. He was walking toward the dugout, bat still in hand, helmet still on, mind already shifting toward the post-game routine that his former mentor had described in such detail: the nutrition, the recovery, the quiet discipline that separates elite athletes from everyone else. Then the umpires moved. It happened fast. One stepped in front. Two flanked him from either side. The lead umpire spoke directly, firmly. The bat needed to be surrendered immediately. The jersey needed to come off for inspection. Witnesses on the field described the scene as surreal. Players who had been celebrating stopped. Coaches froze mid-sentence. Camera operators swung their lenses toward the commotion without fully understanding what they were filming. And then the Diamondbacks players arrived. Now, this is the part that requires careful explanation, because it's been wildly mischaracterized since the footage started circulating. The two Diamondbacks players were not acting out of aggression. They were, reportedly, responding to a request from the officiating crew. When equipment inspection requires physical restraint of movement, to ensure the player cannot discard or alter the item in question, players from the opposing team can be asked to assist in securing the scene. It is an obscure, rarely invoked protocol. But it exists. The problem is that nobody watching knew that. Not the fans. Not the broadcasters. Not even most of the players on the field. What they saw was two opposing players physically grabbing one of the most famous athletes on the planet. And they saw that athlete, the calm one, the disciplined one, the one who eats plain pasta and wakes up at 5 a.m. and never complains, completely lose his composure. Ohtani dropped to one knee. His fist hit the turf. His voice, usually so measured, so quiet, rose to something raw and unrecognizable. He was furious. And for the first time in a very long time, everyone watching could see it. Here's what most of the commentary after this incident missed entirely. People focused on the drama. The image. The conflict. But they didn't ask the deeper question: what does it mean when a player with Ohtani's self-control reaches a breaking point? Think about what we know of him. His former mentor, one of the most respected pitchers of his generation, spent years alongside him and described a man who treated his body like a scientific instrument. Who ate plain, unsalted food not out of habit, but out of commitment. Who separated bulking phases from cutting phases with the precision of a professional nutritionist. Who built systems around himself not to show off, but to quietly, consistently be the best version of himself every single day. This is not a man who loses his temper easily. This is not a man who makes emotional decisions. So when he punched the ground and yelled at the umpires, that wasn't a tantrum. That was a signal. That was a man who had spent his entire life being disciplined, being careful, being above reproach, suddenly being publicly accused, in front of the world, of doing something dishonest. For someone whose identity is built entirely on integrity, on doing things the right way, on outworking everyone, on earning every single result through legitimate effort, being accused of cheating isn't just insulting. It is a direct attack on everything he has spent his life building. The ground he punched wasn't just turf. It was frustration. It was the weight of years of sacrifice, suddenly being questioned by three men with badges and a rulebook. The bat was taken. The jersey was taken. Both were sent to MLB's equipment testing facility. The league released a brief, carefully worded statement confirming the inspection had taken place and that results would be announced within the standard review window. They did not confirm who filed the complaint. They did not name which specific rule was suspected to have been violated. Ohtani's representatives responded immediately, issuing a statement that was direct and unambiguous: the equipment was fully legal, the player had nothing to hide, and they expected the inspection to confirm what they already knew. The Diamondbacks organization declined to comment. And the baseball world, from talk shows to locker rooms to social media threads at 2 a.m., did what it always does in moments like this. It split into two camps, immediately and loudly. One side said the system worked. A complaint was filed. The rules were followed. The inspection is happening. That's how it's supposed to go. The other side asked a harder question: if this player, this specific player, with this specific reputation, can be surrounded, stripped, and searched in front of millions of people based on an anonymous complaint, then what does that say about how the sport treats even its most celebrated figures? Here is what Darvish said about Ohtani, and it applies now more than ever. He said the numbers don't explain him. The titles don't explain him. What explains him is how he lives. The preparation. The routine. The discipline that started not in a major league clubhouse, but in a high school cafeteria, measuring rice, counting protein, building systems at an age when most teenagers are barely getting enough sleep. That is the player who got surrounded on a baseball field and had his character publicly questioned. And that is also the player who, within 24 hours, came back, said nothing inflammatory, kept his routine, and let the process do what it was designed to do. Because if there's one thing years of watching elite athletes has taught us, it's that the ones who last aren't the ones who perform the loudest. They're the ones who stay the most consistent when everything around them is chaos. The inspection results will come. The truth will come out. But regardless of what those results say, what happened on that field was a reminder of something the sport needs to reckon with honestly. Greatness doesn't protect you from suspicion. And sometimes, the most disciplined person in the room is the one who ends up on their knees, punching the ground, because the system they trusted just treated them like a suspect. Baseball has always been a game of inches. That night, it became a game of trust. And the question now isn't whether the bat was legal. The question is, will the sport prove it deserves the players who give everything to it?